Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Michael Ignatieff, Rector of CEU, and I want to welcome you to, I've lost count, I think this must be the 23rd lecture in our series, Rethinking Open Society. For those of you who are not part of the CEU community, this is an attempt on our part to think honestly about the challenges facing open society. We're a university with a mission. For us, the mission, open society, means free minds, free institutions, free politics. But that ideal is under challenge almost everywhere, and it's under challenge here. The series has thought about open society in a global context, but at its core, it's always wanted to think hard about this region. We had, for example, very early in the series, almost a year and a half ago, we had Dorothy Bela, one of our distinguished colleagues from EUI Florence, former member of this community, who gave a very important lecture about the political economy of open society in East Central Europe. And today we have, without making too invidious comparison, without casting anybody in this room into shadow, I think we would all agree that Bela Greskovits is one of the ornaments of this university. He's a university professor, which is top of the, you don't get any higher than that, you know. He's a university professor in the Department of International Relations and Political Science, a much loved teacher and a much respected practitioner of his discipline, the editor of Capitalist Diversity in the Media, the author of 10 Years of Enlargement and the Forces of Labor in Central and Eastern Europe. And he's going to talk to us with some slides. So I'm going to sit over there and watch the slides with you. He's going to talk to us about civic activism, economic nationalism, and open society, recent trends. So this will be an attempt to see what very powerful, data-driven political science can tell us about this region and the part of the world which we live in and love. And with that, let's welcome Bela Greskovits.
So thank you, Michael, very much. An extremely kind introduction, and it is an honor to participate in this important and interesting series. Thank you for coming and being interested in what I have to share. There is something incredible here. I see here a number of students from my classes from this spring. Now this is really remarkable that after months and months of suffering and struggling, it's not yet enough. So a funny moment in the life of a teacher. As you see, I tried to change a little bit the topic of my lecture relative to what was advertised earlier. And what I like in this lecture is that it hopefully will bring together two major areas of my research interest. One is civic activism, social movement, civil society, and the other is comparative political economy. So let me first tell you about the structure of my lecture. So I will start to locating my presentation in an international context, which is a worldwide double attack on liberalism. We see many signs and phenomena related to it. Then I will present a Hungarian case study of an illiberal political force in opposition, and then in political power. And this case study will have basically two parts. Both parts are empirically based. One is based on my empirical research on the civic circles movement, which I find extremely important in the successful rebuilding of Hungarian right. And then the second part is illiberal politics in rule. And here I will talk about the economic and social policies of the Orbán government between 2010 and 2018, and how these policies should be evaluated. And my brief evaluation is that we have a U-turn in Hungarian ideologies of development, a radical turn, but a much less radical turn, more continuity in terms of actual policies, both as far as developmental policies and social policies are considered. And then I will come up with some questions and puzzles that friends or advocates of open society have to solve and have to answer. So, the new political economic context. These are bad years for liberalism. So liberalism is under attack in many countries of the world, both as a political project and as an economic project. In terms of the political project, liberalism is attacked for its emancipatory features, namely that it emancipates the wrong actors. Minorities, sexual minorities, ethnic minorities, people involved in environmental issues, women against men, right? So liberalism as a political project is attacked for its equalizing or emancipatory achievements. And then at the same time, and very often by the same political actors, it's also attacked as a force that through global capitalism creates much inequality, right? This is especially clear in the wake of the economic crisis. So liberalism can do no good. Whether it emancipates or whether it creates inequalities, it looks like it's pretty much on the defensive. Now, the rise of an illiberal counterattack is then either explained by a cultural backlash or economic insecurity and social deprivation, or a combination of both. So the cultural backlash is basically attributed by social groups who feel that the silent revolution of value change that basically embraced the entire Western world leaves them behind. And with their traditional attachments to nation, religion, family hierarchies, and so on, they are looked down by other actors. This then often combines by their perceived lack of competitivity in the labor markets, social deprivation, and in many cases by others who compete for them, both for jobs and for welfare benefits. Now, what is actually common in these economic and cultural logics, that both of them focus on the grievances of the losers, of the have-nots. May I suspect that this is partly due to the kind of liberal soul searching. Liberals feel they betrayed, they left behind the white working class, the simple people, and so on. And then the other focus is that the researchers basically try to see how these people, these losers, are merged and combined into electoral protest coalitions that are more successful in a number of countries nowadays than earlier. Now, I find these explanations not wrong entirely, but incomplete. And here I see the importance of the unique Hungarian case. By now, overall, the Hungarian regime and Premier Orbán Viktor's illiberal state building, I don't think it's very exceptional. But there are a couple of exceptional features here. One is its resilience. It's an extremely successful political project, like it or not. 6 elections, European, municipal, national level elections, 1 in a row. We are facing elections very soon. The forecasts are not good for the opposition. And the other is, which is less known, that part of the success story is that this project, this illiberal project, has strongly embedded strong roots, strong support in civil society. So the Hungarian case tells us a lot, not only about the lower classes, so to say, the ordinary people, the losers, the have-nots, but through this experience of the resilience of the, and the factors of resilience of the Orbán regime, about the role of upper middle classes that play a very important role in stabilizing these regimes, and tell us about the dynamics of illiberal society building and then state building, both before and after the electoral victory. So they tell us how the illiberal project could rise while in opposition, and also how it was implemented while in power. So I make 2 arguments, and one of them is related to civic activism. And the argument is that the rise, the ascendance of illiberal right in Hungary is rooted in its superior embeddedness in civil society, superior relative to the left and the liberals, that was achieved in opposition. And I also argue that founded by Viktor Orbán in 2002, after an elections that the right and his Fidesz party lost, the so-called civic circles movement mobilized all fractions of the right, but not only the right, but certain fractions and certain organizations of non-rightist advocacy groups in pro-poor policies, environment, peace movement, to catch up in terms of civil society organization and contention with the left and liberals, who, I argue, originally were better established in civil society. So there was a fight here that the left and liberals lost in society before they lost it in politics, right? And after 8 years in opposition, this accumulated social capital in civil society was transformed into political capital and explains partly, besides the policies of the new rulers of Fidesz, the landslide victory of the Fidesz party in the 2010 elections and the consolidation of illiberal rule ever since. Now, my research is based on empirical data and archival research of the civic circles movement. I found 4 features of this movement which I consider crucial. This is a militant movement in terms of hegemonic aspirations and its collective practices. I will show you data about the movement's militancy. Very massive in its membership and activities. We talk about 150, 160,000 activists, more than 10,000 organizations, civil society organizations, hundreds of larger organizations cooperating with the civic circles movement organizations, and typically we are talking about inter-networked civil organizations. Don't forget that we are before the Facebook age, right? So this is 2002. Internet exists and is used, but Facebook and other social media are not yet there, right? It's middle class based and partly upper middle class based in terms of social stratification. So we talk here about conservative lawyers, teachers, doctors, priests, pastors, entrepreneurs, and their organizations, as well as media people and people of art. We are not talking about fascist mobs, the way that time the left liberal political leaders and the media presented these organizations. And we are talking about not people active in the villages or the small towns, but typically in Budapest, in its environment, agglomeration, and the big cities of the countryside. 2/3 of all the events, I recorded about 5,000 events over 4 years, organized by the movement. 2/3 of these events were either metropolitan or basically organized in big provincial cities. Let me show you some data, and I don't want to talk much about it, about protest events. This comes from another research, Hungarian protest events between 1995 and 2011. What you see here is that especially from 2002, the right outcompeted the left on the street in terms of marches, strikes, but then also petitions, rallies, and so on and so forth. And especially after 2002, when the movement was organized, very often the civic circles were among the organizers. These were actually not violent protests. Many of them were graphomaniac type of protests, basically, which also tells you about the intellectual background, the educated background of the activists, right? Many of them were actually not about economic issues, but issues of identity. Nation, religion, media contents, and the like. Okay, what I found is that the movement was Janus-faced from the birth. It had a Tocquevillian as well as a Gramscian aspect. And you see here Gramsci and Tocqueville in between young Orbán Viktor, and don't take it as in any ways blasphemic, right? So if you go to the internet and read the diploma work of Orbán Viktor, which he submitted at ELTE in 1987. He was 27 years old. The title is Organizing Civil Society in an Authoritarian Regime, the Case of Polish Solidarity, right? It's good stuff. I would say at CEU, I would grant an A for a master's thesis like that, with ample references to Gramsci, Tocqueville, but also Habermas in terms of the public space. So Orbán Viktor knows his Gramsci, knows his Tocqueville. I would sometimes wish to see left-wing leaders remembering the great Marxist and liberal philosophers and political theorists as much as he did. Now, what does this mean, Gramscian and Tocquevillian? So basically, the organization of the movement followed a hybrid formula, which I find a winning formula. A Tocquevillian civic logic was central to reorganize the grassroots networks of the right, combined all streams within the Hungarian right, the national Christian middle class, the populist national middle class, and the far right initially. It also helped these civic circles to reinvent the holidays, the heroes, the kind of authentic writers and symbols of the right, and organizing their local media, local and not just local, but higher level media. That time, the right was indeed in an inferior position in terms of media access. Okay, but this then was combined with the Gramscian hegemonic logic. So this Tocquevillian civicness was basically mobilized, and then the civic activism within these civic circles was mobilized for political ends. This movement and its leaders wanted to win over the whole society, which is basically symbolized by some quotations by Viktor Orban, clearly talking about hegemonic aspirations. The nation cannot be in opposition. It's a very interesting paradox. There is one flag, there is one camp. This is about uniting the right, and whoever wants to be member of these circles, right? The nation cannot be in opposition. You can be part of the nation by sharing the principles of national imagination, okay? The movement, if you read actually the communication of people participating in these movements, they felt dignity, they felt that they are taken seriously, they felt that their opinion counts. How could this happen? These were typically people who were not yet really involved in politics, so that was partly their first encounter with politics. They felt that they live in a non-democratic regime ruled by the tyrannic majority that will not protect them. Right? So they felt very much in a similar way, just to bring it home for you, like the opposition today. Right? They felt that they have no media access. They felt that the elections will only be in 4 years. So they were full of activism. So they basically felt strong attachments, and the movement gave them these attachments through creating emotional relationship to various imagined communities. Here I obviously refer to Benedict Anderson's term, the nation, Christianity, citizenry, and Europe. And if you feel these are obsolete categories, let me tell you, we are 12 years after the collapse of communism. It's not that people were born with clear ideas about what the nation is, what the religion is. So in a way, they were not born as nationals or nationalists or Christians, let alone citizens or Europeans. So there was a way for educating them and letting them practice this. And this practicing happened through frequent encounters of the members of the community civic circles with each other and with leading activists. Among them, the main role was played by patriots, activists of patriotic or nationalist organizations, professionals, politicians, priests, and media pundits. Let me go in some more detail. Nationalism. As one can empirically investigate the nationalist offer of the civic circle, one sees a relatively complex picture. We see 4 types of nationalism at a minimum that was offered to different audiences, from local patriotism to Hungary of 15 million Hungarians, which includes obviously the neighboring countries' minorities, to Hungary as a country in Europe. Let me just tell that the first Fidesz government between 1998 and 2002 did a lot for Hungary's European integration. They had the expertise, both politicians and technocrats, who then went to the civic circles and explained them what will happen with Hungarian culture, legal system, agriculture, industry, the church, in a united Europe. Here, the civic circle's contribution was, yes, Europe is our future, Hungary is our country, right? Hungary first, never second. And then we had some sort of interesting kind of nationalism concept, which I term sacral medievalism, which is related to an ancient past that goes back to thousands and thousands of years, is exemplified by, summer camps for young people learning old Hungarian military arts, customed processions, the cult of the of Corona Sacra, and so on and so forth. Camps where young people could learn cuneiform writing or old cuneiform writing, and then these things could combine with each other, right? So I don't know, see the poster which symbolizes the 15 million Hungarians country. So this was a poster created by one of the best Hungarian artists, painters, and graphics on the eve of the 2004 December referendum, whether or not Hungary should offer double citizenship, meaning that time a European passport for the Hungarians of the neighboring countries, right? And this poster was circulated across the civic circles. So all the 11,000 or 10,000 circles got it. Now look at the symbolics. What do you see there? A slice of bread, right? In the form of Greater Hungary, right? The bread is shared. Hungarians in Hungary share their bread, whatever they have, with the neighboring countries' Hungarian populations. What is shared here? A European passport, right? So bringing together the idea of 15 million Hungarians with Hungary in Europe, where the basic experience was that Hungary does not exist as one cultural nation, so it has to do things to nurture these feelings. Okay. Sorry. Okay, the next feature of the movement is a very strong presence of the so-called historical churches. Many of the events were organized either in churches or in church-related property. Monasteries, religious gymnasiums of both the Catholic and both of the Reformed Protestant churches. Many of the participants of the movement were church-related, either belonging to the church, clergy, or, say, teachers of religious gymnasiums, together with the students, the parents, or monks, giving lectures or participating in summer camps, organizing summer camps. And then the themes were very often either liturgic or other church-related topics. So a very strong support of all the Christian churches you can realize. In 2003, for instance, first half year of 2003, 31% of all events had some sort of church-bound, church-related aspect, right? Now you can ask interesting questions, what explains this, right? Apart from obvious ideological proximity, I have other guesses here, but I will not go in details now. And a third very important issue for the civic circles was the fight for their own public sphere of the right, which is creating the media, the right-wing media. They did not have much money. It is true in this period, 2002 and 2010, that partly the major print media forums, partly the televisions, were pretty much dominated by either left liberals or commercial capital. Now, the civic circles didn't like any of these. So they were fighting for an equal media representation, which happened in many ways. They tried to create their local small-scale media. You see villages, basically, of 200 inhabitants producing their first ever print media about the famous people of the village, right? To the major weeklies and some of the dailies and some presence in the TV. So this was a battle. And then if you see the kind of media-related activities of the public, of the civic circles, you see two major focal points. One is to defend right-wing media and attack, combat left liberal media for lies, and defend the right-wing media from assumed attacks. And the media pundits meet audience type of meetings. Hundreds and hundreds of media meetings happen, partly with far-right media pundits in the context of the civic circles. Okay. So the next point is, probably some of you find it controversial, which is not a problem in itself. These circles don't exist in their original form. Some of them, yes, but not 11,000 or 10,000. They have less role as when the right was in opposition. But they exist in some form. The spirit exists in the form of the so-called peace marches, which were organized by the Civic Unity, Civic Union organization, which is an umbrella organization that claims to be the heir of the civic circle spirit. The last such event you saw this year on March 15. So this typically attracts many, many people. Now, the typical critical view on this meeting, on these marches, is that these are basically brainless pensioners who are bribed by the government and government money into participating in these demonstrations with a sandwich, free trip to Budapest. And again, I say, okay, this is not entirely wrong, but it's incomplete. And there is actually existing research on the mindset of peace movement participants, which tells these people, no less than those who participate in pro-government, anti-government demonstrations, fear democracy important. They fear their voice counts. So it's not that they are anti-democratic. They like their democracy, What really, apart from this, distinguishes them from the anti-government demonstrators is that they are more frequently than others participate either in patriotic and or religious organizations. If you remember my previous slides, this is not surprising, and follow right-wing media. So we have two Hungaries existing next to each other. My point doing this research and my feeling of fascination with a political direction which is not my cup of tea is that it's for half of the country, right? Including my own mother. And if I want to live in this country, I have to talk with these people, be able to talk with these people and understand them. That's my personal take and fascination on the issue. And it doesn't work otherwise. Okay. Let's go to the economic and social policy aspects. Here I make another argument that the resilience of illiberal right when in power, meaning 2010 to 2018 so far, is also supported, apart from what I already presented, a strong embeddedness in civil society, by a hybrid policy strategy that helps mobilize consent of the haves domestically. We are back to the middle classes and upper middle classes, and at the same time satisfies veto players, transnational capital, and EU bodies such as the EU Commission, parties of the European Parliament externally. I found 4 features, and this is now based not on my own research alone, but a paper in the making with Dorothée Bole on the Visegrad states, not just Hungary. So, the first characteristics is that there is a noisy politics of change towards economic nationalism, building a national bourgeoisie, fighting the colonization of international markets, the IMF named them. But this is combined with quiet policies of continuity with the pre-2002 regime major economic policies. Now, the interesting story here is that if you read the evaluation of the Orbán regime's policies while in power, the friends of the government and the opponents of the government agree in one thing, that the change is systematic and radical. And we argue that actually there is as much continuity as change, right? So there is an interesting task here to understand why the radical rhetoric when the change is relatively limited. There is a rebalancing between economic nationalism and neoliberalism. There is welfare protection for the haves and workfare programs for the have-nots. Although the regime's stated aim is putting an end to economic dependency, what we really see is maintained dependency, but diversified dependency more than before. And here is the major critical point, that the regime is able, for buying time, of enduring political dominance at present, but this happens at the cost of erosion of future-oriented competitive advantages. Let me now go in some detail. No matter what the regime's economists, politicians claim, there is no sharp break with what was the regime's original typology, at least in our view, which is called embedded neoliberalism, which is strong market-oriented policies, open market, European integration policies, combined with welfare compensation offered to losers of the change. So if you look at the graph here, this is based on the economic freedom indexes of the Heritage Foundation. The economic freedom in the Visegrad states, 2004-2016. It's true that since 2010, economic freedom or liberalism, neoliberalism in Hungary declined, but it is still similar, not much under the economic liberalism index of the average of the 10 East European newcomers to the EU. It is roughly where it was in 2004, when the country was admitted to the European Union, right? What is happening or visible, however, is that whereas, let's say in 2007, 2008, the country was the Visegrad states' leader in terms of economic freedom, Now it's bellwether, right? In 2008, 2007, Hungary was the most liberal. So in a way, there is a cutting back on liberalism or economic neoliberalism, but it's not over, right? It's still a free economy. Same about welfare. Public welfare spending. You see the data, 3 data all come from the Eurostat database. Hungary is still the largest spender among the Visegrad countries. It's a different issue, on what and how efficiently this is spent, but one cannot say that the welfare state is over. So this is still a decade of embedded neoliberalism, even for Hungary, right? What is, of course, distinctive in the Hungarian case, that all the other Visegrad countries went towards more liberalization and more welfare spending. Hungary, the opposite on both directions. But in a way, it's sort of rebalancing as well. Okay. Economic nationalism. So again, very often, the new regime is considered to be economic nationalist, financial nationalist, clan state, mafia state, name it, right? Now here again we find, yes, there is economic nationalism, obviously there is, but it's cautious and selective. It is restricted to 4 areas, basically differentiating between so-called bad FDI and good FDI, exploitative FDI versus productive FDI. It indeed consists of taxing and nationalizing in the banking, retail sector, energy sector, and media. If we look at the data and compare the share of national bourgeoisie in these sectors, actually building national capital did not start in 2010. It started earlier, right? The Orban regime added a little bit less in practice than in terms of rhetorics. There is no dramatic turn here as well. And then, of course, the whole issue of corruption is coming up as helping, building, supporting this national bourgeoisie. But then a government, Hungarian intellectual close to the government told what is called here corruption is actually supporting the national bourgeoisie. That's the government's policy. Now, if you think about it, okay, on the one hand, this is ridiculous. On the other hand, you should show me a single case of a national bourgeoisie that was not built with sort of, murky protectionist features, especially in a latecomer developing country. Now, all these noisy political rhetorics and policies, actual policies, are combined with the quiet politics of subsidizing manufacturing FDI. So there is literature out there showing that actually the Fidesz government is much more generous to foreign manufacturing corporations than the previous socialist and liberal government was. They were already pretty generous. What you see is also that compared to the GDP, the inflow of FDI in Hungary is actually not dramatically worse, rather in some cases or some years even more than inflow of FDI to the other Visegrad countries. So multinational firms like here. And then, of course, the new social model, which we characterize in this draft paper by the terms depletion without replenishment. Again, there is a noisy politics that is about fighting austerity, protecting the middle classes, and building a work-based society, which is actually, again, middle classes, upper middle class families, is happening partly through reverse redistribution of income and benefits to the haves from the have-nots, right? And fighting low employment and unemployment through public works, right? Now, here is a point I want to make. If you think again about the last thing, the things that I tried to tell as a characteristics of the Orban regime's economic and social policies, it is not the case that these priorities make no sense. Supporting to some extent a national bourgeoisie can be actually justified by the argument that in a country that actually got rid of state socialism without a national entrepreneurial base and was immediately exposed by an extremely strong inflow of transnational capital, it does make sense to create some sort of national bourgeoisie. Otherwise, imagine the health of a society where all the important property positions are occupied by foreigners. It's problematic, you know, so there is something there. Fighting austerity through reverse redistribution of income to the haves from the have-nots. This is, of course, painful because it creates immense poverty in many cases, or exacerbates poverty. But of course, you know, it can be argued that a conservative, middle-class based welfare policy tries to combat poverty not directly by helping the poor, but by stabilizing the middle classes from going bust. And this is what is happening, of course, with unpleasant and unacceptable side effects. Fighting low employment, unemployment through public works. There is a lot of literature out there that this doesn't help, actually, the people involved in the public works program to get back to the normal labor market. Still, one can argue that in desperate, depressed areas of Hungary, where the state is not there, basically the private sector moves out. This is the only way of employment that these people actually, that these people are better off if they work any kind of work than if they don't do anything. Of course, you know, there comes a lot of racist, ethnically based prejudice with the whole program, but actually very low employment was the problem of the Hungarian economic political regime before the Fidesz came to power, and there was no solution found. So, a major problem, however, is that this noisy politics of fighting austerity, helping the middle class, building a work-based society, is also combined with the quiet policies of social disinvestment and exporting the welfare problem of Hungary through out-migration. Social disinvestment, again, there is huge literature out there about, you know, how the regime disinvests from education and healthcare. This will be a problem, obviously. Now, the alternative would be, okay, is mechanical investment into education a solution once the country cannot create compatible and competitive conditions within a united Europe for young people to stay? Do we then invest more into brain drain? We train the doctors of Germany and the teachers of Italy, and so on and so forth. So I see this problem, but I also see the difficulty and sophistication in the process. I am almost done. I show you still two slides. One is that instead of overcoming dependency, the regime bought time by diversifying the sources of dependency. As you see, Hungary is extremely successful, actually, within the Visegrad region in attracting EU cohesion and structural funds. And it also profits a lot from the remittances of migrant labor, right? So these became alternative sources of financing development. Now that the country did not overcome dependency, this is, how to say, I would not overstress this problem. Small countries are typically dependent. It's another issue how they climb up in the hierarchy of international development. I want to close with some puzzles for open society. Obviously, there are many puzzles here, but what I really don't yet know and understand, and this refers now to the first part of the talk. This powerful, expansive, militant, middle-class-based civil society taking over the positions of the left and liberals happened, as it were, in front of the eyes of the left liberal rulers between 2002 and 2010. Why the weak response? Is it pure negligence? Is it a Hungarian specificity that the left and liberals were so weak in responding to it? Or is it a post-communist specifics? It's not so easy to be left and liberal after a communist regime that stigmatized leftism. Is it part of a global or European trend? I started with a reference to a global situation. If all of these, then in which combination? This then opens the agenda for very interesting comparative research. As you realize, I managed almost to give a lecture almost without using the word populism. And I am happy. So the Hungarian story can be told, actually, probably with some coherence without using the term populism. I see something else here, a sophisticated regime, which is nationalist to some extent, but cautiously also European integrated. Its rhetoric is terrible. What it does to democracy, in my view, is terrible. But is it populism? I think it's something else. Okay. And then the last question, which bothers me, and actually in a positive way, can the rainbow banner of open society, our love to diversity, learn from the tricolor or those forces that rally around the tricolor and the cross? And what? I mean, here there are puzzling issues. Open societies for diversity in civil society, conversation between the diverse groups of civil society, and economic freedom, right? Now, but then the question is, open society is on the defensive, liberalism is on the defensive. Can then a counter-hegemonic strategy be built on diversity, merely on diversity? I have no answer to this. The other question, for which, of course, one would like to see answers, and I have none, is the conflict of economic freedom and social equity. What can one tell, as advocate, believer, friend of open society, as I am, with many of us in the room, to offer in a situation when there is indeed a pretty savage inequality-creating effect of global markets, economic crisis. So how to relate open society and political liberalism to the problems with economic liberalism as a worldwide global organizing principle. Thank you very much for your attention.